Hi, everybody. How are you doing today? Hope you're well. This is going to be part two in the video on this little rhinoceros beetle that we're drawing. In this video, I'm going to add some details with pen and ink, and I might just touch a little bit of watercolor onto this guy, but we'll see how far we get, see what we think. Um, So again, if you are just coming to this video, you might consider going back and watching the previous one. Um, I think it's called Rhinoceros Beetle uh, Tutorial Part 1, something like that. But yeah, so just pull up my reference image on my phone. I talked in the previous video how sometimes I will use, I'll print a larger image of this, um, but for the purposes of this little drawing that we're making, this is a fine size to work with. I've got some pens here, some nice ink pens. This happens to be what I'm using currently. I have tested all different kinds. If you got any questions about what kind of pens to use, let me know. I'm going to use a 0.5, which refers to, if you don't know, refers to the size of the tip. So there's a 0.5. Just to show you how that can vary, I'll just show you here a 0.05, and I'll put the two of them next to each other so you can kind of see. 0.05 is tiny, tiny. So you can see kind of the difference. And then I'll show you a larger one next to this one. So here's a 1.0. So we went kind of up 3 different sizes. It's a little bit more difficult to tell the difference here between these, but yeah, I will use these different sizes. I'll probably go back to the much smaller one for some of the detail work and some of the legs, like if I want to do some fine hairs or anything like that. But like I said, I'm going to go kind of for the middle of the road, use this 0.5 to begin the drawing. And what I'm going to do to start is I'm just going to kind of create the whole outline of the whole piece. So I'm going to go over the lines that I've kind of drawn. I've looked at them, I've made decisions about, yep, I'm happy with this. So I'm just going to kind of block that in. Um, some people might speed up this portion of the video, but I think you're welcome to fast forward through this portion if you want, but sometimes I think there's something to be gained from just watching somebody kind of draw. So I'm gonna keep it as is. Drawing that horn that kind of grows that was behind this other one. Um, you have to kind of make decisions. So with this piece that I'm working on, I kind of made a decision that how do I want this to ultimately look at the end? Do I want to see um, do I want it to be more illustrative? Do I want it to be more realistic? What am I going for? And I decided mainly because I wanted to use pen and ink. This is kind of a more illustrative drawing that I'm gonna be creating here. Um, which basically means that I'm not. I mean, there are some illustrations that are very realistic, so you could say that those artists, even though they're illustrators, they kind of go for that realism. But then there are some that they don't worry so much about uh, you know, whether their image looks exactly like a photograph. I always like to think about how the word illustrator in my mind means kind of to shed light on. So they're just kind of somebody that brings light to something. And most of the time, if you think about kind of what light does, it shows you things. It allows you to see things. Um, I think about moving across my home in the middle of the night. I've heard a noise. The light that I turn on, whether it's on my phone or a little flashlight that I carry, that shows me, what might be out there. Mainly for my toes. So just so you know, we talked a little bit about it in the previous drawing, how this whole little curved section here would probably be made up of small segments. I don't have that. If you look here at my drawing, I don't have very much detail to go from, so I wasn't worrying too much about it. But I have made it a little bit bumpy, kind of on purpose. So, and I'm going to use, like I said, I want to use some pen and ink techniques, and I think I'm going to add just a touch of color when the whole piece is kind of finished. Um, just a reminder, so I'm getting ready to kind of draw the eye, and I created that in the previous drawing video, this little wedge that should remain light because I want that to kind of stay a highlight. So I'm just going to, as I'm drawing the circle, excuse me, I'm going to I'm going to purposefully leave that wedge. There's that little leg that's on the back side, the leg that's on the other side of the body that we can't really see. Oh, and I just realized, that's interesting. I think, so I thought this was kind of an antenna shape earlier, but now looking at it and thinking about it a little more, I feel like this might be the other leg, the other front leg, just kind of where it shows up in this image. So here's the other leg, the one that's, again, on the back side of the body. And I just added a little bit of a kind of a rough detail to that. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So it should not be a smooth curve. This is made up of different little segments. So I feel pretty good about that. I feel like I've outlined this pretty well. Um, you might recall too, or if you've just recently seen the video, so I drew in some of these lines, which I'm now going to kind of go over again, but these are intentional, and these represent the highlights that are kind of on the insect's body, where its body is very shiny and it's reflecting that light in a way that almost is white. Gonna kind of create this guy too. Just kind of defining these different areas and looking at my image again, just to kind of, remember what it looks like. There's a very fine highlight. The reason that you see this bottom part of this guy's body is that there's a very thin highlight here. So I'm just going to kind of create that space. And now I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch to a slightly larger pen because I want to fill a larger space. So I'm going to switch this out. I'm not going to go for the 0 or the 1.0. Look here. Here's one of these guys. This is what I'm looking for. So this is a round. You can see on the end there's the tip. So I'm just gonna, all these spaces, because the spaces kind of between the bodies should be like nicely black. So I'm just gonna kind of use this because it'll fill a larger space fairly quickly. So I'm just gonna fill that guy in. All of this kind of undercarriage. Just kind of filling in that space. The other thing I'm going to do, and I meant to do this before I started to fill in this, is I'm going to go across the piece and do some erasing. So I've got some graphite marks, some pencil marks that I don't feel like I need anymore. So and I don't want them to kind of show up in the finished drawing, so I'm just going to make them kind of go away. I'm going to look, so just a couple of other places. So now I'm looking in these parts of the legs, and for example here, there's kind of a drop shadow on this part of the leg. Just going to kind of create that. And I'm not going to do these guys, so this part here I feel like should be black, but I can kind of see it, so I'm going to leave that. And I'll probably end up making it very dark, but I don't want it to be this true black. Might go in, because I've defined some of these highlighted areas. Actually, no, I'm not going to. I was going to say I might go in and kind of fill in this space with solid black, but there's not much. Like the way this white kind of fades. I'm doing that thing, I sometimes call it the realism rabbit hole, where I'm looking at this creature and I'm thinking about my image and I want to make it look very realistic. And what I'm really kind of going back and forth right now with is the way that this highlight kind of fades. So it's not just a solid white highlight, it fades from that white into the black. There's kind of an in-between there. And what I'm thinking about is how I said earlier that I'd like this piece to be more illustrative. So I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of trying to make this look exactly like the photograph, which sometimes it's really nice to free yourself up in that way, where you're not thinking too much about trying to make it look exactly like the photo. It's very freeing. I know a lot of students that I work with, they struggle because if it doesn't look like a photograph, they feel like they've not been successful as an artist. And that's, most of the time, that's not the case. I talk about how if people can look at your image and they can tell what it is, in my mind, that's a success. That's something you should be pleased with. So I'm happy with this. What I am going to do now is I'm going to go back to one of my larger size pens, one of my larger tips, not the largest one. I think I'm going to go back to the number 5. I'm going to create some cross hatching. So I'm going to do some shading in here where I'm just kind of using the pen. Because I really would like this to be mostly pen and ink piece. And I'm going to start here. So what's cool about this, so I'm going to do this cross hatching, and what I want you to notice is how I'm curving these lines. And I'm doing that on purpose, totally intentional. And my thinking is that those curves are going to kind of show you a little bit about the shape of this insect's leg. And then the other thing I want you to notice is I'm doing this thing where with my pen, as I come to the end of the mark that I'm making, I'm kind of lifting it quickly. And what that does, I'll show you in just a second, is it kind of creates, show you up close. So you can see there, the ends of those lines get to a really fine point. The lines up here at the top, I wasn't using that technique. They kind of come to a more rounded or blunt end. But I want that fine line on this outer end here, because it's starting, the light is kind of hitting this guy in a different way. And I want this to be kind of darker than this end down here, so I'm going to come back again and just kind of go in between each one of these lines that I've made, and that's going to start to make this kind of darker, that part of the leg darker. You'll notice I keep touching that reference image because I want to be able to kind of look at that at any moment just to kind of study and see what I see. And I'm just going back even again and kind of filling in some of those spaces. So I'm kind of happy with that. I'm going to continue across this bottom section, and I'm going to continue to use that lifting technique. I like to, so I'm going to turn my piece of paper now, because I find that if I'm pulling straight away from myself as I'm drawing these lines, they're a little bit more successful. So I'm just going to kind of create that situation where I can make those lines in that way. Again, I kind of like the way that's going. This guy, as I'm looking at it, I feel like it's kind of half of it is covered. I'm going to go for a finer line. Now, some of you might be saying, I don't have all those pens with all the different tips, and I do want you to understand that that's okay. You could do this entire drawing with the same pen. It's just kind of that technique of how you use it. So don't feel like if you don't have all the different pens, you won't be able to be successful with this piece. This finer line that I'm going for now, because I'm using it, it just allows me to get more of these lines into this space. If I was using the tip that had the thicker nib on the end of it, then I would have more lines in this space. But this is just kind of allowing me to get a little bit more detail in there. And then I'm just gonna kind of color in this little claw here on the end, because I feel like that guy should be mostly black. So now I'm just kind of looking and studying some of these other areas. Gonna come into this area, and I'm going to use, again, my 0.5, that kind of slightly larger tip. And I want to be, so just in the same way that I was intentional about doing the lines here on the leg, I want to be intentional about creating these lines. So I'm gonna do that same technique again of lifting my pen as it gets out towards the end. So I'm getting close to where that highlight is. I might extend my lines just a little bit longer, and I can go over lines that I've already done. That's what I'm doing. So I'm kind of creating shadow by making these repetitive lines. And I'm looking at my image. I'll pull that down so you guys can see it. So I'm looking at my image again, and I'm looking at where it's darker. As it comes into this area, I'm going to try to put my lines closer together and make them extend a little bit further up. Kind of like the way that looks. And I notice I want some of this space. So what I'm going to do now is crosshatch. So I've just done line work that's kind of created shading, but now I'm going to cross those lines. And that's kind of where the term crosshatch comes from. So I'm turning my paper again so that I can pull these lines away straight, as opposed to trying to, it's just a personal preference for me, but it's what I recommend. So I'm going to draw these lines from this edge. And what this is doing, this is like another layer of shading that I'm creating, and it's going to create more darkness in this corner, more depth. So I'm just going to do it kind of down here along that corner. And I want this to extend, looking at my image, I want to do some more of that in this space. You can see I'm kind of varying the length, so I've curved it a little bit and kind of varying that length. And I'm going to continue that up. So I'm looking again. I'll draw it lightly with a pencil. In my mind, I kind of envision this, but sometimes it's easier for students to see. So I'm drawing that, and I'm going to fill that space with these same lines. And I'm actually going to, as I do this, I'm going to try to follow this curve, just because I kind of like. So I'm drawing that. You can gently curving it, and I'm ending, or I'm lifting that pen where it meets that line that I just created. And because I want some of this space to be darker, I'm gonna turn my paper again, and I'm gonna cross hatch it. And you can see I kind of adjusted the direction of those lines. I'm going to do just a little bit more across here. So I'm just kind of creating some shadow within this guy's shape. So again, I'm going to do a little more because as I'm looking at this image, I'm noticing that this end has a little bit more darkness to it. So I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm gonna curve these lines as well. So I'm gonna pull these lines towards myself. I'm just gonna create that shape. So you can kind of see I'm just filling this guy up with some crosshatch lines and some regular line work. This space in between here that should be black, I'm gonna do some more line work in there. So turn it just a little bit, and I'm trying to control. So I want these lines to go all the way across those lines, and you can see I'm trying to lift it so that they're, and I'm also being kind of intentional about not staying, fully within those lines that have been created there. Just kind of fill that space. I'm going to carry this all the way across because I feel like that's what it does. And then I'm just going to come back again, and I'm going to create cross lines on this. So I've turned it just a little bit, and this time I'm going to be pulling them towards myself. You can get to a place after you've done a whole lot of this pen and ink work, this cross hatching, where you can make these lines fairly quickly. One of the things, so there are some artists who would, I guess for lack of a better term, they would scribble this. And you can do that, but I like the control of the way this looks. I'm going to switch now to a finer line. I'm going to do a little bit more shade work in here. So I'm going to the, let's see, I think it's a 0.1. Yep, 0.1. And I'm going to come, so the bottom of this is kind of the bottom of that highlight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull lines down towards the lines that are across from it. And I'm just going to, they don't necessarily have to touch, but I'm just kind of filling this space because most of this whole area down here should be kind of dark. I'd be interested to hear, especially if you're one of my students from my school, let me know whether you enjoy this cross hatching, this line work, or whether this makes you crazy. Because I enjoy this process. This for me is something that I enjoy doing, all this line work and filling this space in that way. All right, going to come over and kind of work in this guy. And I'm going to go back to my slightly thicker tip, so my 0.5. And I'm going to work from this edge. And I'm going to, what I'm going to first do is kind of follow these lines just because I kind of like the direction of them. I'm definitely going to come across most of this space with several layers of line work. So I'm just kind of filling this space. When it encounters that part that I know is lighter, I'm going to kind of make my pen lift. You can see I'm just kind of filling this whole section up. Another way that this could have been done, everything that we're doing here is instead of drawing these lines, we could have just kind of left them with pencil and done this work with the pen. So you would have had this edge, but without that hard line drawn, which could, could be really visually interesting. I'm going to turn and I'm going to imagine kind of the shape of this. I feel like it's kind of a round shape like this. See that? And almost following the curve of this. And I'm just going to draw some crossed marks that follow what I would imagine that curve to be. And again, notice how I'm lifting that pen at the end of each one of these marks that I'm making. All these curves that I'm drawing are visually, they're kind of in a very subtle way, kind of an unconscious way, they're showing the viewer of this image that this creature has, rounded body, is not a flat thing. So that's kind of my thinking there. All of this also should kind of be that solid black. I'm going to go ahead and do the eye. So I'm going to color in this eye. I want to create, because I see those highlights on these horns, so I want to create that shape for those highlights. So this is kind of a space that, I don't want to cross. And then I'm going to do some more cross hatching, because this space, almost all of this space is like really dark. So I'm starting with those straight lines. I'm going to knowing that I'm going to come back with some curved lines. Trying to be real conscious of staying inside the lines that kind of form the outside of this guy's body. Gonna draw now around the eye. So one thing I'm gonna do is a real subtle thing, but I'm keeping a very fine line around the eye, because the eye has the potential right now to get lost within this drawing that I'm making, because it really is, it's kind of is lost in there. It's black within the black. So you can see I just kind of left that very fine. Let me just hold it up closer so you can see. So the bottom half of that eye, you can see there's that very little tiny space in between there. Gonna come back now with some of these curved shapes that are cross hatching. So I'm just kind of, you can see. Still using that 0.5 millimeter tip. For the horn that is on the back, I'm not going to worry about highlights. I'm just going to go ahead and color that whole horn in solid. All right. I'm going to come up here. There's that little bit of above this highlight here, there's just kind of a tiny bit. So I'm using the 0.5. I'm curving these lines, and I'm just kind of creating that shadow. So I feel like on the head here, I could add more darkness. In fact, I'm going to just in this area here. And for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm looking at how those lines cross. And what I want to do is I want to make this new line kind of come straight between them. So you can kind of see that. And I'm going to start from this edge, and I'm just adding a layer of straight lines. And you'll see, again, it's like real subtle, but it's creating more darkness over this space. And I'm going to do the same thing kind of around the eye here. So I'm just going to pull from that same center line that we've been working from, and I'm just drawing another layer of line. All right, feel all right about that. This leg back here I want to use, so I'm just going to use some of these thick lines. I could color that whole space in, but I just want to use some line to kind of make that whole section a little bit darker. So I'm just using those thick lines and just kind of drawing across the whole thing. And then the same thing with this one back here. This one should be almost completely in shadow, so I'm putting my lines, nice straight lines across that kind of are as close as they can possibly be together. So all right. So in this leg, I can see there's like some, it's almost like this guy's got some muscles. So I'm defining some areas with my pencil. I'll pull that up closer so you can see it. So from the image, I can see that there's kind of these little oval shapes almost. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to use my finer line because this is a smaller, tighter space. So 0.1. And I'm just going to, from those shapes, I'm just going to draw some lines that follow those curves, and they're going to move in both directions. So I followed that curve up, and I'm going to now follow this curve down. And then these spaces in between there, I'm just going to kind of fill in. Do the same thing here, so I'm going to follow that curve that I've drawn up, follow this curve down, and then fill in that in-between space. Going to come up here where the leg kind of meets the body, and I'm just going to, again, draw some straight lines there. And I'm going to draw also now some straight lines that come up from the bottom of this section of leg. So you can see that kind of created that little curve there. This portion, so I'm just going to kind of fill in this. This is pretty dark. I'm going to color in this bottom claw here, and I'm just going to draw some curved lines that come all the way across this guy. They're very small curves, and I think I'll probably come over this maybe with another layer. So I don't know if this, oh goodness, I realize it's really hard for you guys to see. I'm going to hold this up, try to hold it up. Put this here so you can see what I'm getting ready to draw. So I drew those tiny curves there, and now I'm just going to come back across this with curves that go the other direction. All right, so I feel okay about that. Looks like maybe he's wearing some fishnet stockings. And now I'm going to jump back into this last little section, and I'm gonna color this in another video. I've decided. I noticed this section here. I just want to fill this in with mostly dark. All right, so gonna work on this guy, and I'm gonna draw again with my pencil some of those curves, because this leg has got a lot of highlights on it, and I'm noticing just how these curves, they come in between to where the spikes are. So I'm kind of creating those. There's a little bit of a highlight here. So I don't know if you can see those. I'll hold that up so you can see it a little more closely. Created those curved spaces, and I'm using that really fine line again, the 0.1. I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm just going to kind of fill this space. Some of you might ask, like, how do you decide what direction to make your lines go? That one was real subtle. I need to figure out how I can prop this up a little bit higher so you guys can see this. I'll have that worked out for the next time we get together. For now, I'll just kind of hold it up here. So I chose to make these lines go in that direction because that's kind of the direction that leg's going. It just kind of feels right. So now I'm going to use this curve as my guide, and I'm going to just make some marks that go to the edge and just a little bit beyond that curve. Do the same thing here. Go just to the edge, maybe a little bit beyond that curve. It's going to come all the way down into these spiked sections. So yeah, I think that looks okay. And looking at my image, there's kind of the same things going on in this bottom section, but I'm gonna kind of fill the bottom section kind of the same way that I did this guy. And again, I'll hold that up so you can see it. So I'm just gonna kind of create curve shapes. This is helping your viewer, our audience, see what this should look like. And now I'm going to come across it kind of in a different direction, but still kind of creating that curve. Now, I don't, my personal opinion, I don't want these to look like they're wearing fishnets. So I am going to tweak it just a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to draw some very small lines that are straight, that come from what I perceive to be the bottom edge of this part of the guy. I know there are some of you out there who will really enjoy this because it's just kind of fine line, meticulous work. I know that for myself, depending on the day, I really enjoy this sort of thing, getting into real fine line work. Something really fun about it, and the result is almost always just kind of really great. So, all right, so there's that guy. We've shaded him now. I need to do this work here, this guy here, but I'm going to kind of leave it here. One other thing that would be really important to making this image kind of really come to life is we want to create a drop shadow. So I'm going to save that for the next video, where I'm going to use some watercolor to kind of fill in some background, make this guy even more interesting. I think I'm even going to choose a different color, like some kind of I feel like a dazzling blue or something like that would be fun. Even though it may not be realistic, still kind of fun for, because we can do what we want. This is our image. We can make it how we'd like. So anyways, thanks so much for joining me. Hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you again soon.